we are living in a time of great scientific transformation.
The line between progress and risk is thinner than ever.
The one I constantly hear is that if we just had more compute, we could solve biology, right? If you just throw more GPUs at it, this thing will solve itself.
Trust goes far beyond technical reliability, right? Like trust is a deeply emotional thing.
This idea that like AI comes in and suddenly AI is the product, I think is faintly ludicrous, right?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Data in Biotech. I'm Ross Katz, and today's episode is a very special one. We're celebrating our 50th episode anniversary. Over the past few years, we've had the chance to speak with some of the most thoughtful leaders in biotech, founders, operators, scientists, builders, people who work with data. You know, the people who are watching this industry evolve and who are also helping to shape it. And today we're bringing three of those voices back. So you're going to hear from Jacob Oppenheim, who's the venture partner at RA Ventures, Wolfgang Halter, who's the director of data science at Merck, and Dave Johnson, who's the founder and CEO of Dash Biosciences. All three joined us for deep dive conversations in the past where we got to talk to them for the full hour. But in this special montage episode, we asked them to reflect on the state of the industry right now. So where is innovation really coming from? How do we manage the tension between hype and trust in AI? And what are some of the common myths that still slow biotech down? So what you'll hear is part retrospective, part roadmap of what's changed, of what's still broken, and of what might still be possible. So much of what we think about biotech is wrapped up in where the breakthroughs are coming from. You know, are startups at the edge? Is academia falling behind? Is big tech reshaping the rules or just dropping in a shiny new algorithm? So to kick things off, we asked our guests where they see the pulse of biotech innovation coming from today. So let's dive in first by hearing from Jacob Oppenheim, then Wolfgang, and finally Dave Johnson. Are you seeing a shift in where biotech innovation is coming from, whether that be academia, startups, big tech, or, you know, something else?
I can't say I'm necessarily seeing a shift there. I think we are living in a time of great scientific transformation. I think oftentimes the signals of that transformation are a little bit muted, even if we are living in that transformation. So while everybody likes to talk about AI, I would say that I was just bouncing this idea around with a friend that, you know, when I grew up in the 90s, big pharma was an easy thing to hate on because what were the drugs coming out? What was going on? There was Vioxx was in the news. There were just like slightly better versions of drugs with high prices. I mean, today we've got Keytruda, which cures 20% of cancers. Please check my numbers there, Ross. We've got Humira, which is life-changing for anybody with an autoimmune disease. We have mRNA vaccines. We have CAR T. The scale of transformation that we are living through is enormous because we're living off the fruits of a biotechnical scientific revolution. And so to me, there's an immense amount of innovation that's just sort of hitting that industrialization stage as people are able to use technologies just to even see further and just be better scientists on top of it. Well, I know I'm going to attract hate for this being on an AI or data in biotech podcast. Honestly, I was joking with some people the other day that frankly, people use bad methods to analyze single cell RNA sequencing data. But if I told you, hey, a lot of those analysis methods kind of suck and many of them are just wrong, would you actually give up the results of everything we've learned from signal cell? Nobody would do that. Absolutely nobody would do that because we've learned to map the immune system with that. We've learned to map entire tissues and organs, and we're continuing to discover off of that. So, to my mind, we live in the fruits of high innovation despite the craziness and uncertainties in the outside world that create a fundamental tailwind behind everything that we're trying to do.
Wolfgang Halter, welcome back to Data in Biotech.
Thanks, Ross, for having me again.
So the first question that we wanted to ask you is, are you seeing a shift in where biotech innovation is coming from? You know, whether that be, you know, academia or startups or big tech or some other class of organization that's contributing or, you know, carrying more of the weight of innovation?
That's a very good question. And I think at the very heart of also what we do at Millipore Sigma, right? Like we are equipping academia, biotech companies, as well as like the big pharma companies with like not only like materials, but also like services all around like innovation. And traditionally, I would say like the classical approach is like you start in academia, then like there's some startups forming, and then like those getting oftentimes acquired by a big pharma. Now, like I would say big tech are certainly like a new player on that playing field, with like providing new tools like AlphaFold or DeepMind, not by DeepMind, or DNA Bird, that allows like very new like approaches to some of that innovation piece.
Dave Johnson, welcome back to Data and Biotech.
Thanks for having me back.
Awesome. Well, we're just going to do some quick questions today. The first question, are you seeing a shift in where innovation in biotech is coming from, whether it be like academia, startups, big tech?
It's certainly a tough market at the moment. That's caused some shifts. I think we're all seeing that investment dollars are kind of moving later stage assets, kind of clinically de-risked assets, and so that's certainly having a hit on the kind of biotech innovation in the market that we're all optimistic that'll come back. Certainly the NIH grant cuts and the challenges in academia are certainly impacting the funding in the innovation in the academic market as well. So certainly there's both kind of across there. We do see a lot of interest coming in from tech companies. So like Isomorphic earlier this year with a kind of $600 million raise, showing that tech has making big bets in this space. So it's exciting, and obviously the more kind of super bright minds we have coming to the space, the better. But I do think they come in with a little bit of a naive attitude of like, well, we built these big systems, technical systems that with billions of users. Are like, how hard can drug development be? It turns out it's really hard, right? It's really hard. And so a lot of them are kind of learning that the hard way. So I think they need to have the respect for the problem that's here and have the humility for it. And then a lot of them run into kind of operational issues, which is like, fine, the science is solved, but like now we need to do in vivo studies. What does that look like? I got to go find a CRO, and then I got to deal with change orders and inefficiencies and 3 month delays and so on. So obviously that's a big part of what we're building at Dash, is how we transform that market of development to change the economics, change the pace of that, to really realize the potential of a lot of this innovation that's coming in.
I haven't seen like breakthrough insights, innovation directly coming from big tech, more like on the tool and technology side, but they are certainly like a new player in that field, and that will change a big thing. I would say like the different companies or company classes is one thing, but when we look at regions and areas in the world, that's a whole other dimension here, where we probably see like a lot of movement in Asia happening, where like all those things like academia, startups, and industry are like much more tightly integrated. So that's also like a very, very interesting dynamics that we see.
What's funny about this, and touching on the data piece, is that the further we see, the more that we need computational approaches, the more that we need to think about data carefully, right? We can sequence all these things, we can measure all these things, and then suddenly, what does it mean? Wait, we have a lot of information. Actually, this is a much more interesting problem than it used to be.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So, I mean, you can look at the ways that we can sequence immune cell receptors today. Like, we can make personalized immunotherapies. These crazy, crazy things. And these are deep computational problems in a really exciting way. So, the integration with what we're doing computationally with what's going on biologically is only getting deeper.
So yes, innovation is happening, but progress never arrives without friction. So the next question we asked was simple. What are you most optimistic about, and what's keeping you up at night? The answers, they were honest, nuanced, and frankly revealed just how thin the line is between breakthrough and burnout. Moving on to the next question. What are you most optimistic about in biotech's near future, and what's keeping you up at night?
Good question. I think it's for both questions the same thing. So, and that is the democratization of the biotech tools. I would say, like, the technology is getting easier to access, lower costs, and things like open source is also entering kind of like biology. Cloud labs are like a completely new game. So, like, this new level of accessibility is certainly exciting, as well as like scary at the same time. Like, I would say it opens the door to misuse, and there's a certain level of governance and regulation needed for that. But on the other hand, it's also incredible, like how much you can do now, and how much access that gives to like other players also in the area. So the line between progress and risk is thinner than ever.
So what are you most optimistic about in biotech's near future? And on the converse, what's keeping you up at night?
Let me answer those in reverse order. I
Go
mean,
ahead.
what's keeping me up at night? I mean, the situation outside in the outside world is completely crazy all the time, right? And I think as somebody who spent a lot of their time in graduate school and after graduate school in a slowly recovering economy, but with a lot of stability, it feels definitely quite weird for there to be a lot of instability in the background. At the same time, what am I optimistic about? I'm optimistic about the pace of advance in science, and I'm optimistic about our ability to digest all of the great new tools and discoveries that have been coming out over the past decade or two. I think there's a long, long difference. There's a huge gap between what is science and what is engineering. So, the point at which you can take something that's a discovery in the lab that's sort of chanced upon a principle that's found by accident or or through hard work and hard discovery, and Tarney's trying to say, instead of just discovering that principle, to use it as a tool, right? To make it as a fundamental component of something that you're trying to modify and to build something around, that's going to take time, right? And because that takes time, that means there's so many great innovations for us to work with. And there's going to be a great matter of things continuing to improve over time. I mean, I think if you showed the drugs we're developing today to the drug developers of 10 years ago, even people would be shocked, right? Everybody likes to there are so many premature obituaries for small molecule drug development, but every couple years it seems like somebody's making molecules that nobody ever dreamed of before with tightly integrated computational approaches of an efficacy that nobody ever dreamed of before.
What are you most optimistic about in biotech's near future, and what's keeping you up at night?
I'll start with optimism, right? I'm most optimistic that I think there's more interest in being efficient in this space than there ever has been. Historically, efficiency is not rewarded, right? The drug development is like a really expensive lottery ticket system where you're rewarded for how fast you de-risk things rather than how efficiently you do it. But partly it's the capital markets being really tight right now. Cash is harder. But partly, I think there's this realization as I talk to people that the current system is going to break if we don't do something, right? It continuously costs more and more to develop drugs. And so I'm optimistic that this kind of industrialization pitch, automation, technology are all going to be, are much more accepted now than they were historically, right? More than ever. What keeps me up at night is kind of the US's presence and leadership in the world when it comes to biotech relative to China, right? That really, concerns me a lot. For years, China has lagged far behind the US, but as of last year, they're now running more clinical studies than the US is, right? And it's not just the kind of rote manufacturing and, in vivo site work, they're owning the full R&D supply chain. The number of folks I talked to are senior scientists, spent their career in pharma, and now they're working for the small US outpost of a Chinese biotech, right? A number of those people. And so there was a great book recently from Patrick McGee, a journalist, called Apple in China, and talks through the whole kind of co-relationship between Apple and development of China and so on. But it also talks through how China has systematically kind of moved up the value chain in many industries. So think like electronics and high-speed rail and solar panels and now EVs, where they move from the manufacturing through actually being the developers of this and the world leaders of that. And I worry that if we're not careful, biotech's next. So this is the thing that keeps me up at night. The kind of cuts in academia and government are not helping. They're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot at the wrong time for that. But in a globally competitive market where we can't compete with labor costs in China and the third world, we have to leverage technology, right? So it's the only way to do this: automation, technology to be competitive on that stage.
If you hang out in biotech long enough, you'll start to hear the same catchphrases over and over again. We all have the data we need. AI is going to replace wet labs. More GPUs will fix everything. But our guests, they've heard them too, and they're not buying it. So in this next segment, we unpack some of the most persistent misconceptions floating around the industry and why they matter. So what's a common myth or misconception about data in biotech that you still hear today?
The biggest one that I hear repeatedly is that we have so much data that we need to leverage, and it should be so easy, right? In reality, like there's a lot of data, but oftentimes, particularly in biology, it's purely annotated. It's like missing important metadata. It's very siloed. It's only applicable to like a very niche use case. So to be honest, in many cases where we're looking at like AI use cases with like data in a bio setting, we're looking at like very small data and not big data.
What's a common myth or misconception about data and biotech that you still hear today?
The one I constantly hear is that if we just had more compute, we could solve biology, right? If you just throw more GPUs at it, this thing will solve itself, right? And I think a lot of people are still looking for like, what is that chat GPT moment of where like with just enough compute, all of a sudden you get this big step change in value. The reality is, it's actually in my career, it's always been about the data, like not enough good, high quality, consistent data, right? Because in this industry, a lot of times it fits in a spreadsheet. And if it fits in a spreadsheet, it's not enough data, right? And the data you have is often messy. It's not homogeneous. It's not on the right organism, right? Great tons of mouse data. Where's the human data that we care about, right? And then it costs just an inordinate amount to produce that data, right? ChatGPT only worked because you could put the entire internet into it, right? We just don't have that kind of scale of data. And so that's where a lot of the drug discovery companies are realizing this, and they're building out huge wet labs with lots of robotic automation with the explicit purpose to generate that kind of high quality data set that you need. So those are the ones I think will actually get somewhere, the ones who actually build data sets that are representative of the ultimate system they're trying to produce.
So as AI and biotech sort of converge or come together, how do we build trust and manage expectations among regulators, clinicians, patients, like in the value of what's being done, the efficacy of what's being done, but also, like the extent to which you can trust what's what's being applied
Right.
here.
So look, I work in biotech. I work on drug discovery, right? And I think at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're making drugs, right? So the product has to work, right? And so whether you got there with computational tools with AI or with just straight wet bench biology, right? It doesn't really matter if at the end of the day it's a drug, right? And so to me, I might punt on some of these questions. I think in sort of the larger sense, I do think these are questions that people have to address with healthcare. But you have to ask, like, what's the product, right? This idea that like AI comes in and suddenly AI is the product, I think is faintly ludicrous, right? Like the fact, the internal combustion engine was not the product, right? The product was people built cars, right? But they also built trucks and they also built airplanes and they also built all sorts of factories with machinery that could run on its own, right? And so I think one has to think about what is the product and what is enabled by the product. And too often I think there's a overly large focus on taking something and replacing it with quote unquote AI, whatever that means, instead of saying the vistas that are unlocked by novel machine learning, by novel AI tools, allow us to do completely different things than we had thought about before, right? So why don't instead of saying, let's just try to do that more automated or faster, why don't we go see what we can totally do now, right? Isn't that a better way to think about the world? Perhaps it's just because I'm an optimist at heart, but I see that the potential to do things that we didn't dream about, and that's what excites me.
I'm imagining that interpretability and sort of is like a big aspect of that as well, like being able to sort of show your work and where the
Yeah,
information comes from.
that's a really good point. I mean, I was about to say like explainable AI is certainly plays its role. I think it's a tad overrated, to be honest, because like in the end, it's like even for the experts sometimes, like the explainability of an AI model is hard to read. Let's put it that. So for the end users, it's gonna be almost useless. Like the end users, when you think of it, they wanna rely on experience, like what they personally experience with that AI tool, as well as like institutions. So like they have a certain brand that they trust, and that's what we have to play with. I don't think explainable AI is the key to that trust topic, to be honest.
I mean, and relatedly, one of the technologies that's come about lately that's at which the US has been at the leading edge to date is, AI, generative AI. And I'm just curious, as AI and biotech converge, number one, do you feel like there's a problem in building trust in these technologies as it pertains to biotech? And if so, how do we build that trust among regulators, among clinicians, among patients in these model-driven innovations or model-driven decisions?
Well, in general, trust takes time to build, and it's easy to lose. So you certainly have to be careful. It's the right question to ask. I think when you think about building trust in models, it comes down to consistency, right? A model has to behave consistently in a way that's useful for people to trust it. It doesn't actually have to be super accurate. It just has to be consistently, performant, right? So even a poor model that it has known failings, known flaws, you can work with that because you can build systems and processes around it. But a model that's 99% accurate most of the time, but every once in a while it's catastrophic, right? That's the EV, full self-driving problem, right? That's really hard to have trust in a system like that. And so it's really about how you control things, how you test things, how you explore the design space of that, how you put processes and systems around your models to do that. And to a great extent, that's what the GXP regulations around software and technology within the clinical space are for, right? In GCPs is around change control, change management, risk management. So all those same principles apply. So just by following those, I think you get quite a bit of the way there. One of the things I'm very critical about is the push for explainability in models. It's kind of one of my soapboxes that I stand up on is that people often say like, oh, you have to have explainable models and that solves the trust problem. And the reality is it doesn't, right? Because you could still have explainable models that are stochastic or have edge cases you didn't think about, or you're abusing them in ways or using them outside training data. Plenty of things you can do wrong with explainable models. And then by focusing purely on that as some sort of panacea, you're putting behind, leaving behind all the potential for much better models who could solve things better. So just don't think it's the right approach.
So where do we go from here? In a world full of siloed data, inconsistent models, and operational friction, how do we actually build the next era of biotech? Our guests had some powerful and surprisingly pragmatic ideas about what needs to happen next, from trust and testing to agent-based protocols and plain old execution. Here's what it might take to make this transformation real. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you want to get out there, based on where you are now?
If only to emphasize the message that more is different and that the hardest part of bringing about new technology is operations, right? We always need more operators, is what I'm constantly telling people. Be great at doing what you're doing, right? And work with a team to make that, to build the next great thing, right? Human creativity is incredibly important when we see these new technological advances, right? And it's not just the idea of wouldn't it be cool if, right? It's actually making that happen in practice. It's that level of applied creativity and innovation that really changes the game. And to me, that's the most exciting part.
Yeah, and it strikes me that that's a message that often gets lost in this idea of, AI sort of automating everything away is sort of the human element that needs to get sprinkled in between in order to actually put these things into
Right.
practice.
What should we be using AI for, right? There are
Right.
going to be great uses out there, right? And I can think of some, but you know, there's a much, much more that we can do with these things than what I see what I see in the typical conversation these days. And we can it's continue to need to expand and grow in that direction.
Can you share a key moment in your career or in your company journey that's happened since you appeared on the podcast? And if you have any lessons that came before or after about data and biotech that are applicable, we'd love to hear those as well.
I would say like one key moment was when I learned about the model context protocols and like MCPs and in the framework of like agentic AI, large language models. For me, that was an aha moment, I would say, because like the more I learn about it and the more I realize that this might have the potential to really bridge some of those silos that we are experiencing in those operational systems and in like those different data domains that we are dealing with. So much like RESTful APIs transformed how software systems communicate, I believe like MCPs have the potential to bridge some of those persistent data silos gaps that we still face in biotech. And that's what I'm pretty excited about. And we are doing a lot of experimentation there already, with, I would say, mixed success. Some of them, the things they are really exciting. In some cases, we also learn like there's also like a lot of marketing happening. But I'm pretty convinced that this is gonna be a big change for all of us.
Since you're already experimenting with it, and it sounds like you're excited about the potential applications of MCP and the framework, the protocol to the biotech ecosystem externally, and then I'm assuming the sort of biotech ecosystem that you're developing internally. Can you give us sort of a vision for how MCP fits in to that ecosystem, or like maybe not like how it does, but how you envision it could fit into the ecosystem?
We're still talking about like a communication standard, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's crazy like how this small piece, I'm like we're focusing on such a small piece, but like everybody's talking about it. Like for me, it's going to be a game changer because it will allow us to start thinking of AI first approaches more than like human centric approaches. So when we're integrating a certain data source into our data lake, in the past we basically integrate something into our catalog. We then have like a catalog that is searchable, and then for people to go in and search for the data. With MCP, we are just creating a new interface and allowing that like for AI agents to be found. So we don't have to worry about like those catalogs getting messier and messier and messier over time, because like to be honest, like all of the catalogs and data lakes and data warehouses eventually suffer from that complexity. For humans, it's getting like more and more hard to find like what you're looking for. Find an AI agent that like who's has a catalog of 1,000 different MCPs. That's going to be a different story, and that's what I believe is going to be like that biggest shift. Like we in the future we will not define like this biotech landscape only for humans, but for AI that will help us navigate it.
Can you share a key moment in your career or in Dash's journey that's happened since you were on the podcast, and any lessons you've learned?
You mentioned that when we first spoke, when I first appeared on the podcast, it was kind of right after we really launched the company. We're still in build mode, like building this automated assay platform to do bioanalysis. I think the kind of big point that I look back on is that first customer project we had. There's been a number of customers now, but the first one, not only was that kind of very rewarding of kind of building this thing and actually having first revenue and all the months of engineering and stuff kind of come to fruition for this one. That's a big kind of psychological moment. But the real significance of the time we ran that first customer project was just how boring it was, right? You put the samples on, press go, and it did the assay. It did what it programmed to do that we spent months kind of building it and training it to do. And it was not eventful at all. It was boring. There was no drama, no firefighting. Just kind of did the thing, and everything looked great. The data looked good, and we were done, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to build here, right? There's things like these assays that have been around for decades that at this point should be reduced to kind of to boredom, right? To reduce to rote automation. And so that's what we built at Dash. We're early in that journey, but the idea is to find all these things across development that we can remove the variability, remove the drama from, execute them in a way with much higher quality, much more consistent data, radically faster, so that scientists can focus on science.
So what did we learn? That innovation in biotech is alive and well, but it's still pretty messy. That trust isn't something you build with white papers or catchphrases or even podcasts. It's something you earn through reliability. And that the biggest breakthroughs might not come from replacing humans with machines, but from building better systems for humans and machines to work together. So big thanks to Jacob, Wolfgang, and Dave for coming back on the show and sharing their insights with honesty and nuance. And if you like this format and want to hear more montage style episodes in the future, just let us know. Drop us a line on LinkedIn or leave a review wherever you're listening. And if you want to dig deeper into any of the tools or frameworks mentioned today, like the MCP protocol or the open source Beatty package, you'll find all those links in the show notes. On a final note, I just want to thank everyone who listens to this podcast for taking the time to learn more about all of the different ways that data is applied to biotech. We launched this podcast a couple years ago with the goal of learning more about all of the different places that data and data science touch biotech. And I know that we're talking about the intersection of two very complex fields and two fields with very fast growing bodies of knowledge. And I also recognize that the podcast format isn't always the best way to go deep on a subject, especially when we're trying to keep the episodes to under an hour and the conversations with our guests to under an hour. And so, what's on my mind after 50 episodes is, number one, just gratitude for that people are interested in listening to this and interested in exploring the different ways that data touches biotech. Gratitude to our guests for being willing to come on the podcast and share their insights and really go deep on their areas of expertise, for people who are still in the process of learning, as we all are in this field that's very fast moving. And then also, I'm trying to think more deeply about how we construct these episodes and this podcast to continue to go as deep as we possibly can in the podcast format, so that this is a place where we're all coming to learn, where I get to learn as the host of the podcast, and as sort of the avatar for all of you, and where you get to learn by benefit of hopefully us asking really good questions, bringing in great guests, and formatting the podcast and the conversations in a way that makes it really easy to consume information about very complex subject matters. So if you have feedback for me or for us on how we can do better, or ways that we can deliver this content more effectively, or subjects that you'd like us to explore, I just love to hear your feedback. I really enjoy doing this podcast because it's an opportunity for me to learn and for me to meet really exciting people who do interesting work across the biotech space, where it intersects with data science, which is really where my background lies. So please reach out on LinkedIn, or I'll put my email in the show notes if you want to reach out by email. And please continue listening. Give us a rating and review if you like what we're doing. And excited to continue doing this for another 50 episodes, another 100 episodes, another 150 episodes. So thank you. That's it for this one. I'm Ross Katz, and we'll see you next time on Data in Biotech.
And that's it for this episode of Data in Biotech. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate, or leave a review in your podcast platform of choice. See you next time.